So now we're actually going to be going ahead and covering the different properties that we can do in our little CSS style sheet here. We're going to go through, we're going to add some of these different animation properties, and we're actually going to start working with it so that we can really get into how the animation works and how we can work with it. So let's get started. Now, I'm only going to be covering some of the basic properties here, but there are many more out there. There are so many different ways that you can work with these animations and change their properties or how they work. But what we're going to do is go ahead and use some of these basic functions so we can get this up and running and working. So let's get started. The first one I want to talk about is animation duration, and this is probably the best, or well, not really the best, but it's the most important one. Because pretty much what happens is the animation duration is going to actually allow your animation to run. So what I'm going to do here is first of all set up this function here, and pretty much the default value of this property here is actually 0. And that's why in the last video this wasn't running at all. We added the animation, but because the default value is 0, pretty much the animation starts and finishes at the exact same time. Well, not really, but we can't see it at all. The time is 0. So what you're going to do here is specify a second value here. So I'm going to go ahead and say 2 seconds, which is quite fast, so I'm actually going to go ahead with 4 seconds. Now if we refresh the page, you can see that that animation does play. And you can see it kind of works like that. It goes from red to yellow to black. So that's the first thing about the animation that you'll notice. It goes, it stops, and then it finishes. And we're going to be using some of the other properties to actually change how this works and maybe, repeat it over and over again and do all sorts of things with them. So the next property I'm going to be covering is the sort of style of how the property works. So we've already covered the name of the property, which is obviously applying the property or the animation itself. We've also talked about the duration, but now we're going to be talking about the style. So pretty much the style is probably the hardest property to learn about, kind of how, we looked at transition properties or styles, and those were the hardest. This is pretty much the exact same. So pretty much what happens here is that the style is going to define the speeds or how the animation works out. So all we have to do is go ahead and type out timing function. There we go. And now from here we can apply the different speeds or styles. So I'm going to be talking about the main ones, and you can probably recognize these from the transitions video. So we have ease, which is the normal one, you can see there. And then we also have a few more. So let's go ahead and check it out. We have linear, of course, which is just straight. There's no speed changes or weird anything like that. You can see it just goes straight down. So you can see a very clear difference there, especially here, unlike the transition, whereas with ease, it would stop in the middle and then speed back up, whereas linear, it just goes straight. Of course, we also have ease in and ease out, and ease in out, just like we covered before. So there we go. I'm going to leave it at linear because I think it looks the best. There we go. And you can see we set that speed curve there. So now let's talk about the next property, which is going to be the animation delay. So the delay is a little bit of a weird case here because you can use positive values, but you can also use negative values, which is a little bit confusing, but let's talk about it here. So I'm going to go ahead and add an animation delay, just like that. And here I'm going to specify a delay time. So for example, 2 seconds. Now, of course, this works perfectly. We refresh, waits 2 seconds, and then the animation plays, just like it would normally. But what if we added a -2 here? What do you think would happen? If we refreshed, you can see it's already at yellow. So what's pretty much happening here is that it starts when the animation is 0, which is the default. It starts right as the page loads. But if you go -2, it's pretty much acting as if you're already 2 seconds into the animation. That's kind of how negative values work here. Now, obviously, there's no real application for this unless you're looking for something really niche that you need it. But this isn't really widespread or used very commonly. It's just a really cool thing to know about animation delays. So the next thing we're going to cover is the iteration count. And I talked about this a little bit when we started the duration, and it's pretty much going to say how many times this thing is going to loop over. So we can use the property animation, iteration count. And here what we're going to do is apply the number of times we want it to iterate. So for example, if I wanted to iterate or loop over 2 times, I could refresh. Of course, it starts a little bit early and it goes another time. And there we go. After that, it's finished. So it went over 2 times. Now there's also a really special value you can use here, which is infinite. And then this means that this is just going to keep going over and over pretty much forever until you terminate the page or close it or even change something. But when this is set, it's going to keep looping over and over again pretty much forever. So there we go. Now let's go ahead and talk about the shorthand property. And pretty much what we're going to do here, actually we need to cover one more value before we use that shorthand, and that's going to be our animation direction. So this is the final value, just like you were seeing here before we started, but it's actually pretty useful, unlike something like the negative animation delay value here. Pretty much what this is going to say is the starting and ending points of the animation. So for example, let's go ahead and add that property there, animation direction. And now we're going to talk about the 4 main values for this function. Of course, the default value is going to be normal, which is just like that. And that, of course, plays from 0% to 100%, just like normal. And I'm actually going to set this iteration to 2 times and remove the delay, just like that, so that we can get the full picture here. So if we refresh the page, you can see that it's just normal. It goes from start to finish. And then you have your opposite way, which is reverse. So pretty much what happens here is it goes from 100% to 0%. And the properties aren't flipped. They stay exactly the same. So if you look at this, it goes back in time all the way to its starting position. So the other 2, which are a little bit more complicated to understand, are alternate. So just like this. So alternate pretty much means it's going to go forward and then go backward. So it kind of bounced back, you can see there. So it goes from 0 to 100, and then in the same animation, well, not the same, it goes from 100 to 0. And then of course, just like with our first 2, you have alternate reverse, which does still the alternation, but it starts at 100 instead of at 0. So it's kind of going to start here and then go back to its starting and bounce back to 100. Let's look at that here. You can see it goes up, and then it bounces all the way back to its starting position. So there we go. That's pretty much how this whole thing works. And those are the, 4, or actually here it's 5 main functions properties. But what we're going to have to do here is summarize all of them, because there is a lot to cover, and you're not going to add 5 animations every time, especially when you have to use all of the different browser support tools and prefixes, and it gets really complicated after some time. So what I'm going to do is use a very cool shorthand that just summarizes everything for us. So we don't even have to use our animation name here. We can just cover it all once in our animation shorthand. So I'm going to do it here, animation. So the first, this takes, of course, 5 values. Your first value is going to be your animation name, which is red to black. Your next value is going to be the duration, which is a pretty important one. So we're going to set it the same at 4 seconds. Your next value is going to be your timing function, or your speed. So we're going to set it linear here. And then next is going to be your delay. Now we removed that there, but we do have to put that delay. So I'm just going to say 0. Next, I'm going to put the iteration count, which is 2. And finally, the direction, which is alternate reverse. Now you can see that does get a little bit long there. So I'm going to leave both of these versions in the project file for you to decide for yourself. Now let's refresh the page, see what happens. Forgot the pixels, forgot the second value there. Let's refresh, and now you can see that it goes from the back to the start, just like we had here. So, like I said, that shorthand is a little bit hectic to memorize and, learn all of the different values, but there is always Google if you forget the order or anything like that. And what makes this really useful is if you want to add any browser prefixes like this, you can easily do that and then just copy this over for the different prefixes. So you can go here, 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 and put your different prefixes. So I have for Mozilla, we have for Microsoft, so Internet Explorer, and then of course we have our Opera. So we have 4 different prefixes here and 5 values. For one element, you'd have to put 20 properties just to get this all covered. Now, you can probably see the advantage of using something like this with that shorthand over all of those really clunky properties. Alright, so that's pretty much it for animation properties, or the different types of animations or ways you can manipulate these animations. Of course, once you learn this, there's a lot of power that can go into it. You can create all sorts of different animations, grow styles, and then you can really manipulate them just by using these 5 values. We didn't even have to touch the animation to make it look completely different. So that's pretty much it. Now, we've covered a lot of features in CSS, and in the next section, we're actually going to be going through and styling a website from scratch as a challenge. So you're going to have a challenge to style a website, and then the solution is the video I'm going to show you, and that's where you're really going to get challenged to use all of the skills you've learned in this section, and maybe touch up on some things that you may not have been comfortable with, or you may have been fuzzy on. Alright, let's move on.